revisiting a topic that we discussed last year about, would you rather develop one way or the other way? It sparked some great discussion, and hopefully we learned some tricks along the way. So I figured it's been almost a year, so we go back and revisit that topic for tonight. Probably talk about a few of the same things, but hopefully get into some different stuff. So I had a couple ideas I was going to throw out there, but obviously if any of you have thought of something that, would you rather do it this way or that way, please, chime in. And this was actually one that was kind of presented to me as, well, what do you guys think about this? Because it's been a recent topic at meetings, the last couple, just in some of our final discussions. Send mail, or would you rather use a plugin or insert from URL so you can send it as HTML instead of just the text email?
Well, I can start. The send mail is the one I use the least out of those three, primarily because of the limited formatting.
Okay.
So, and Teresa might have something to say about this because she often works with email things. But anyway, for the longest time I used plugins, and I was using Dacon's Mail It was my go-to. It had, well, still has a feature of sending a layout as an inline image. So the email that you sent could look like anything that you can do in FileMaker. So your emails could be gorgeous.
Oh, wow, that is really cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, that's what I used to sell a FileMaker runtime product that was invoicing, and people like their invoices to look a certain way. So that plugin gave me the ability, because I had a distribution license for it. So that plugin gave me the ability to customize everyone's invoice, and what their customers received was, exactly what they wanted to see. I ran into a small problem where some invoices, depending on the who was using it, were longer, multiple pages, and Dacon's rolled that into it, so you could send take screenshot. So if you in FileMaker, if you go into preview mode and hit copy, a PNG of the layout goes to your clipboard. The plugin handled that all itself, but
oh wow,
that's a pretty cool unmentioned feature. But that was basically how it worked. So that's what I did most often, was use the plugin. Right now we have customers that do email from within, and because this is what Teresa's doing, do you use send mail, or do you use plugins, or do you use web calls like Earl?
Yeah, the curl. So in one instance we're using SMTP, and in another one we're doing the curl send HTML mail. And for that one, I was using the same. Oh no, I can't even remember who it is. Whoever has they had a demo file with the send HTML mail kind of in there, and then we went and reverse engineered it. The same one that Beth talked about previously.
Okay, I think, was that the DB services one? Maybe, does that sound right?
I think that sounds right.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm probably on the opposite end of the spectrum, just because I use probably send mail more often, but that's just because it's easier. The stuff that I'm sending doesn't require all of the formatting. A lot of it's, emails that I'm sending to myself when a script runs on server to say, hey, this is the process that's completed, and here's like an activity log of everything that happened. I don't really care about that, but or the formatting, I should say. But my interest has been piqued as far as the, insert from URL and trying to figure that out, because it has come up the last couple of meetings. So I may try to add that to my toolbox of things that I'm able to do. So
yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in?
So one more thing about the sending using SMTP mail. I don't know if anyone else saw the 360works email that came around just, I think, yesterday, for people who use their send mail. They pointed out that Google is, as of, I think, May 30th, no longer going to support the kind of the easy way of sending through Gmail. You would go into the security settings, and then you could just kind of allow third-party app access in order to have, FileMaker reach into Gmail and using the username and password as its authentication method to do a pass-through. And they did have some stuff where they were beefing up security, and that would kind of time out if you didn't tap into it and use it every 30 or 45 days. It would kind of toggle it back off and not tell you about it. But now they are apparently phasing that out completely, and you'll have to use the Google OAuth in order to access Gmail. So anybody who's using, like what we are, using SMTP servers, using a Gmail account on the back end to kind of push messages visibly, will have to rewrite that in order to use the OAuth so that it works properly. I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of error message other than like it, right. Or we might just all get 1506, 1502, can't authenticate the server. Just in case anybody out there is using that, heads up, you want to look into enabling the Google authentication, and that will entail, if you have a Google Business Suite, going in, creating a project, enabling the API. I haven't done this yet, so I don't know all the steps, but for all the other Google things you need to do, you have to go into the administration kind of management area, create projects, enable the APIs, create the authentication tokens so that you can use those when you're calling services from within the application. So
good to know.
Well, I would just say that.
A related question.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, early on, most of the stuff I didn't need to send mail. When I got to the point where I did want to try it, all I could do was the send mail stuff, because that was the point where we started getting a lot of grief from everybody that FileMaker wasn't a real database anyway. And so, getting money to go buy a plugin to go on top of it just wasn't going to happen. So we just stuck with send mail, but we didn't need any of the real fancy stuff. It was more just, hey, we got your order. Hey, your stuff has come in. Come pick it up. That kind of thing.
I had a question. You mentioned about authenticating into Google to presumably get emails into FileMaker. Has anybody tried that with Yahoo? Does that work?
I have not tried that with Yahoo, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have not either.
Just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, my experience is just use send mail, because all we're doing is sending PDFs. That was pretty cool.
And then I guess the other topic that I had thought of is, would you rather use a whole bunch of set field steps, or would you rather figure out how to use a loop and use set field by name when you're duplicating a record, or whatever the use case might be, where you would be creating a record and setting a bunch of different things to values?
So I know for us, it's anytime. I always catch myself if I start doing something like that where I feel like I should be making a loop, like you do it for 3 fields, and then you add the next steps. The same 3 fields are very similar. I get this FileMaker guilt comes over me, and I'm like, I have to abstract this. I have to turn it into a loop. I will find some way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's one of those areas where there's like the fine line between, I just want to get it done because I'm never going to have to come back to this, or if you spend a little bit of extra time to abstract it, then it may make it easier to, it's a little bit more dynamic, and in the future, if you have to change the process or whatever, as far as that goes, to move it to something else, and that kind of thing. So part of the reason why it just came up is I had just worked on a little, update to a solution where we needed to duplicate a record, but just duplicating the record didn't work because of security settings, that once you had duplicated the record, there was something that was already set that wouldn't allow the person that created it to actually edit it. So we had to figure out a way to kind of write our own duplication, and that's how I was able to do it. Was set up a layout with the fields that were allowed, used the get field names and get all the values from that, and then switch over and then loop through the values that have been saved to set the values in the new record. So I kind of so that's part of what sparked my interest there with that. But in this case, it depends, which is an acceptable answer, I think. So
as it is for most stuff in FileMaker, yeah.
Yeah.
So we with thinking of duplicate itself, like we almost never use duplicate function because of the reason you said. There's too many issues with security and stuff. It's easier to set a bunch of variables and then do set fields. One of the first things I learned in FileMaker a long time ago, there were a lot less tools available, because I'm talking like 4 years ago, was the ability to tell FileMaker to go to a specific layout, go to field. Go to field was there, go to next field was there, and I think name, you get object name, and you would tab to the script could loop, and it would just keep tabbing to the next field and getting the information and storing it or setting it until it got to the last field, a specific one that would be hard coded into the script. You just had to add additional fields at any time or remove them to change what fields got included in the record creation. I'm probably not explaining it right, but there was it was a neat trick.
Yeah, I still do that. I use the technique. That way, if you need to, basically you tag layout. If you want to add new fields to this sync or add new fields to this process, just drag them onto this layout and put them above that one and name, and then add it in.
Yeah, I learned that from John Mark Osborne at DevCon, the second DevCon. Third DevCon.
okay. So that's one of those old school FileMaker techniques that if somebody brand new to the platform discovered, they'd be like, "What in the world were you doing?"
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. I've got a couple like that where there weren't any variables, so you did set field. Or what I would do is duplicate the record and then set field to nothing for the 3 or 4 things that were different on this second layout, rather than making everybody type the whole thing in like a purchase order or something. The vendor information, all that all stays the same. All you need is line item 2.
Right.
So it was a whole lot easier to do it that way.
The other thing that I did once or twice was just export and import. Export whatever the data you need to somewhere and import it back in. And man, is that delicate. At least it was much more so back then. That broke so easily. New field gets added and the whole thing screws up. So I didn't do that very many times. I was just far too delicate of a solution.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd done that a couple times myself. That at the time anyway, that seemed to be the easiest way to do it, was to do like you said, export it and then import it back in. But
it feels efficient, and it's it's just not a good option.
That's actually the end of my list. I mean, like I said, I can go back on some of the topics that we've already covered, which are always fun to just get everybody's views on. So I don't know if anybody had a question they want to throw out there before I start coming up with other ideas for us to riff on here a little bit.
I have an old-timey one. A lot of the stuff I did originally was automating forms that the university had. And we were able to scan the form, run it through an OCR thing, so rather than having to rekey the whole form in. And it was the best way we could come up with to get it all in, short of opening up a blank layout and starting to type on it, and inevitably then having a typo in one of the instructions or something else, and then it's a mess. So I don't know if there's a better way of doing that now or not. What do you do if you've got to automate an existing form?
Boy, that's a good question.
I mean, it's real easy if you're starting and you're designing the solution, or you're creating the layouts and everything based on somebody else's process maybe, but if you're stuck and it's got to look a certain way, see what other people's ideas might be.
I know we've done it a couple different ways where you either try to recreate the layout as close to, what the existing form looks like, but that can be a pretty painstaking process if you're trying to make it, pixel perfect to match. I know the one thing that we did a few times is that there were some like PDF forms, so we didn't have to like scan it in from just a blank document, but it was actually a fillable PDF form, and we were able to use a plugin that would actually go and load that PDF form and then insert the values that way. And it certainly works, but then you're learning how the plugin works, plus you've got the investment in the plugin itself. But I mean, that would be the other way to go. But I mean, I think your idea is just as good as any, because you can scan in what it looks like and then just figure out how to position, the merge fields or whatever needs to be filled in dynamically.
Yeah, that we kind of settled on it because the first application was, instead of getting the university's 4-part carbon paper PO and putting it in a typewriter, we were generating it out of FileMaker, sending it to a dot matrix printer that would actually write through all 4 layers, because we had to use the official university form. So getting that all laid out, and that's when you discover that whoever designed the form maybe was, close enough. And the height of item 1 was not the same as the height of item 2 or item 3. And so you kind of lined them all up on your page and you printed them, and it looked like crap. And you had to go back and start nudging things, So there's got to be a better way, but that's what we ended up doing.
We were in an extremely similar situation with filling out government forms for the DEA. And there was a 4-part carbon, the original and 3 carbons. And the only way they would accept these forms, was their original forms. This was in the early 2000s. So trying to find a dot matrix printer that could roll through with, grab the holes on the the auto feed paper.
Yep.
And getting the stuff lined up. What a pain in the butt. It took ever to get to a point to where they would go with modern forms, because they weren't even easy to read. That the whole thing was. But we were filling it. The company I worked for was a reverse distributor, and filled out more of these forms than almost anybody else because of the what they were doing. The police didn't have to fill it. Whenever the police get rid of stuff, it's a whole different thing. Whenever you send drugs or anything from anyone to anyone else, a controlled substance, there's paperwork that has to go from whoever originates it and then to where it's going. The police aren't one of those organizations, so they're not allowed to send their drugs anywhere because they can't fill the paperwork out where they're sending it from. So they just go into the woods and burn it. At least I have experience with that.
Wow.
But we could do that. We had to go through all this ridiculous paperwork. Yeah, what a frickin' challenge that was. So glad when Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
Is anybody still using dot matrix printers for printing multi-part forms or multi-page forms?
I have one client of mine that I don't do much work for him anymore, but I built him a solution many years ago. Last time I talked to him, which was about 2 years ago, he was still using a dot matrix printer for some specific part of his business. At one point, he actually shipped it to me along with his form so I could get it lined up right. I tried doing it remotely and just with photocopies of the form, and we couldn't get it. But plugging it into my computer was hard because, it was, I think it had a SCSI connector on it. We had to figure that out too. Lots of fun challenges.
So what's the next topic? I came up with another idea if nobody has one yet.
Go for it.
Okay, so I guess slide controls or tab controls?
Teresa said
That's probably a loaded question.
Yeah.
Well, we can't just have a 30-second answer. We got to at least talk about it for a few minutes.
I think it's easier to do slides because it gives you more control in terms of hiding elements, and you can use button bars to fake a tab headings, and so you have more flexibility with the same expectations and user interface without being locked into what you have to have in some situations.
I would agree with that 100%.
I actually don't remember the last time I used a tab, except for some really small, simple, I have a little settings screen that's got, 2 or 3 tabs. But, on anything that's actually important, I use sliders and button bars because of the added control that you get over the look and feel. I wish they would create modern tabs like the slides. It lets you control more visual aspects of the tab.
Yeah, because that's my one, I guess, pseudo complaint is just that, you can make it look really elegant, but you spend a lot of time tweaking it to where it's, exactly how you want it to look. So now I can't remember, will a tab control on iOS respect swipe gestures, or does it have to be a slide control?
I didn't even test that, but I'd bet money a tab wouldn't respect a swipe.
Okay. I guess I haven't really tried it myself. So like I said, that's what you would think that would be the case, that it wouldn't. That's why they created a slide control.
Yeah.
So the slide control has the entire object as its kind of swipeable area, whereas the tab sits that the top is the only clickable part. You can click it, you can tap everywhere around it.
I think FMburgh basically treats the rest of the tab like a box. Like it's just nothing other than a surface. No.
If I need to do something quickly, it becomes a tab control, and then if I want to make it pretty, then you take the time to, you add the slide control, and then you start copying from the tab to the slide and switch panels and do it again and make it, elegant.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Editing the slides is kind of a pain because of, moving from one slide to the next, whereas jumping from one tab to the next was very quick. But not.
Yeah. The time that when I mutter under my breath, and of course I'm muttering to myself, is because I turned off the navigation dots at the bottom.
Right, yeah.
So then you got to go over to your object panel and actually select, when you want to switch from one to the other to edit it, but that's a first world problem, but it's still like, why can't I swipe when I'm in layout mode to have it switch panels? So
yeah, it'd be nice if the dots appeared in layout mode all the time and just you were hiding them in browse mode.
Yeah, that would be.
What difference? What harm would that do?
Yeah. It might cover up a little bit of the objects at the very bottom, but it's still going to let you edit it, and move it around or whatever. That sounds like a great feature request, Thomas. You should log into the community and put that on there, and I'll upvote it, so at least get 2 votes. So, anybody else have anything else to ask as far as would you rather? Don't all chime in at once. I can't remember if this one is a repeat from last year or not, but just I know it's something I find myself doing more of, is that instead of declaring a bunch of variables, I'll declare one variable and put what I need in a JSON object.
Oh.
Sometimes I do that, but not instead of JSON, I use a let to declare all the variables at once. So, but it depends, because as people have said over the years, that it's easier to break it all out in the script, see what it is, rather than I'll have one comment that says determine all vars, and then you have your one set var and you're declaring 15 different items. Easier to see in the script if it's broken up. But I think it depends on if any of them are reusable. So if in the script, you can take half of the variables, but then under these conditions, like in one of the systems that we have, we're building EDI information. And so, based on if it's this payer ID, or if it's that payer ID, or if it's this payer ID, we have to parse the EDI differently. So I have to declare all these multiple sets of vars, but I can get all the codes with one and they match across the board, but then all the customer information is different based under, from payer A, B, C. Everything's positioned slightly different. So I might break it up and do a couple of different chunks. But I haven't done a lot with setting variables, like setting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the reason why I might do it a little bit more is that's kind of like my go-to method anymore for passing multiple values as a script parameter, is I'm going to pass it in JSON as a JSON object. So rather than figure everything out and declare a bunch of variables and then figure out how to wrap it, I just put it into JSON to start with as a single object, and then that gets passed to the subscript or as a result to the parent script that called it. So
in the subscript, do you then just, anywhere you need specific variables, you just say, you do a JSON get with get script parameter and the name?
Well, it depends, because like one of the things that I did because of the behavior of the let, I actually wrote a custom function that I use that will take a JSON object and declare all of the name value pairs as variables.
Yeah.
So whenever the parameter that's the JSON object gets to the subscript, there's only one set variable that calls this custom function, and it declares the 1 or the 10 variables that are defined inside the JSON object. I don't know if that's more efficient than using the set element or get element everywhere, and pulling it out of the JSON. I mean, what's kind of nice with that method, especially if I have like a nested JSON object or array or whatever, I can still pass that, and if I just use that function one time, then I have a variable that is my nested object or nested array or whatever the case might be. I mean, it's one of those things that makes a whole lot of sense to me just because I've been doing it pretty regularly, and Eric probably hates it whenever he has to go in and troubleshoot one of the scripts that I've written, just because of I'm using 10 different variables that I've never actually declared, because it all happens in this very first script step in the script where it grabs the parameter.
Yeah, that's funny. I did the exact same thing before we had JSON. I would send all my parameters as a return delimited list, and then I would name them in the script that's calling them, like function, like how the parameters show up in a function. So all my script names were, print this thing, and then I would have brackets with each variable, and then I would just send those variables in a return delimited list in the same order. And then I had a single line that did the same thing. I had a custom function that would take the script name, pull out those variable names, take the parameter, and create variables for all of it. And
yeah,
I was at a DevCon telling somebody about it, and the other Todd, he might have been talking about it too.
Oh, okay.
I'm just.
Oh, you mean Geist?
Yeah. That's I'm giving you first, Todd, here. So.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. It might have been, I don't remember who it was now, but he was saying that he always declares all the variables at the start of the script individually because it just makes it easier to debug later on. And I was like, oh, you're wrong. And a year later, that's the way I do it. I just stop using the custom function. I break everything out. I list all the, I guess it's a little bit easier for reference, and especially if someone else, like you said, if it's not you working on the script,
yeah,
it can be a little bit confusing at first.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I do try to do is, like how you said, where you put like script name and then you put like brackets or parentheses or something, and then you kind of list, okay, these are the different values that you're expecting to get when the script is called. Unless I'm expecting like 10 different values or something, I'll try to either put the some type of abbreviation so I know, okay, this is what it's expecting.
Yeah.
But then I'm also very verbose in my script comments at the beginning and actually show a breakdown of, okay, this is what the parameter should look like as a formatted JSON object with, okay, this is the variable name, and it's a number, it's a string, and this is what it's going to do is you pass it this, and then it declares all these variables for you. So, but you still have to get into the script to see it because it's just in the comments there. But hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that, or new
Just-
thoughts on something completely different?
Well, related to that, do people explicitly destroy variables when you're done with them, or you just assume they're going away because the script terminates or you're off to a different script?
That's a really good question. So what we do for local variables, like within lets and single dollars within scripts, we never.
Well, the script ends.
Right,
They go
right.
away.
They just go away. So we don't clear them again. We just trust that this script is going to do, that they're going to behave properly.
Although inside a loop, I have more and more am clearing out variables before restarting the loop, just because I keep getting burned every now and then when, like, a piece of data, the one of the lookups that one of the variables was supposed to catch in every iteration of the loop. If one of them fails and it's holding the old ID that it looked up for the last record, and then it reset, it sets the wrong piece of data, I have started clearing those individual variables inside a loop before going back to the beginning, just in case something, either in the data or in the process doesn't line up. So that is one thing.
Do you mean sometimes users don't enter data the way that you expect them to?
No. Sometimes the unexpected happens.
How bizarre.
Yeah.
For double dollar variables, I do clear them. So I have a solution that has a kind of long wizard for creating records. There's like 8 or 10 steps that you have to go through, and the users need to be able to stop and come back. And there's lots of ways to deal with that, but the way I did was I create double dollar variables to hold the data temporarily until everything's collected, and then it goes and creates the records. But I can't clear them at the end of the script because they're going to be referenced in I don't know how many more, because it depends. There's a whole bunch of, if this happens, then you have these variables, but if this happens, you have those variables. So I keep a script that all it does is clear every double dollar variable basically in the solution. There's a couple exceptions here and there. But so anytime when I'm working on this set of like 10 scripts that all use these various double dollars, anytime I add a new double dollar variable there, I go to my master clear script, add it in there with set double dollar whatever to double quote to clear it out. So I run that script and it clears all the variables I'm using for that section. And that is definitely necessary if you're doing something, convoluted as we happen to be doing.
Well, I got into it because I had to do it in some of the VBA stuff I wrote. It turns out there was some problem where, not that it mattered that there was still a value in the variable, but that variable still hung around in memory. And if the loop ran again, now you got 2 copies of it sitting in memory. The loop runs again, you get 3 sets of it sitting in memory. And pretty soon your machine says, and you're done. So it was just easier to nuke it and start over.
Sure.
Yeah, in some cases when we're using virtual lists and some other items like that, we'll build specific scripts that'll just say, clear variables, or so like, clear VL, and you run that, and that just runs a subscript that walks through and a whole bunch of stuff. So you probably have that in Wizard, that we can call it from anywhere you need it. Yeah,
because we use virtual lists a lot, and sometimes we just reuse existing ones. So being able to clear all those out quickly is useful.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay. Anything else on that topic?
This isn't really,
Okay.
It's sort of in there because we were talking about variables. I seldom use, but because I forget about it every once in a while, that variables can have repetitions. Like I just kind of forget about that. But I found that to be useful at times because you can dynamically get the repetition. Something to keep in mind. Variables have repetition.
Yeah.
That's my whole.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think there's been a couple times where I've used that. I forget the exact use case, but I can remember because I think I was getting like a list of IDs from this table and moving over to another table and wanted to create new records. And I was just one of those ones where you just insert the ID from the list, and then there was auto enter calcs via a relationship that would fill in the rest of the data, so you didn't have to grab everything as long as you knew which IDs from your found set. So I think that's what I was doing there.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, do we want to find another would you rather topic? Yeah.
On the repeated fields, one of the things I found with FileMaker, working with it over the past 25 years, is that they've still kept all the old legacy stuff. So repeated fields were really useful when it was just a single table per file and you had to link files together. But nowadays, you don't really need it so much. But, FileMaker still kept that type of legacy feature set. And I think on one hand, it's really good that FileMaker is pretty stable like that. On the other, there's multiple ways of doing it, which are perhaps confusing now.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I think that's where, for someone that's just picking up the platform now, they have a lot steeper learning curve than what, I had when I started, programming. And you said that's both, good for the legacy solutions, but is it the best? And I'm trying to think, I want to say just recently, I actually found a use case for using, because using variables didn't make sense, but having a global repeating field, made sense at the time as the way to do it. So I don't know if anybody's ever has done anything like that or not.
In our global table, we often we do like a var text and a var num, var container. We'll create 5 or 10 repetitions available in those globals, and we'll use those for dialogues. We have any like a form that you want to fill out, or for transactional data. So let's say there's an edit button on a record. You hit the edit button, it loads the data from that record into the global fields. Then the edit interface is dealing just with the global fields. You can make your changes, and then if you decide, oh wait, you know what, whoops, wrong one, or wait, now it's time for dinner, I don't want to do this now, there's a cancel button, and it can simply, close your globals window. It never touched the original data. So we use the repeated fields in that way. I know most recently I've used them because, when I started using FileMaker, and Thomas was the one who was telling me how to do things, and he was like, repeated fields, nobody ever uses repeated fields, and so but he also said never use the let statement.
That was a training thing. That was not
time.
that was to help with the training. Just
Sure.
Don't do this right.
So I always had, using repeated fields felt weird to me. But then something I did recently, I thought, oh, repeated field, that's the best way to do this. Because it was more for a display for user purposes, to be able to, because I was like, I want this data to show up kind of like a form, almost like a spreadsheet, but I don't want to have to rebuild it all the time. It has to live here for people to come and review it. And then, it was like, reviewing claim information and reporting on it in a way that people could go and review and decide that, oh, wait, no, this one needs to be fixed. And so I use repeated fields for it because it doesn't have to do anything other than sit there until they're done with it. So I thought that worked well. But I also know, if somebody's new to FileMaker, sometimes they open it up and they're like, repeating fields, that's a great way for me to list out all of the phone numbers that are for this one person. And then, when you come and look at it, you're like, no, relationship. That's supposed to be a related table. Stop that. So it's, while it can be very useful, it hurts beginners by taking away like that base concept of relativity from them. So
Great comments.
Okay. Anybody have anything else on? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I have another would you rather. Would you rather encrypt the entire database, choice 1, or encrypt the individual fields, choice 2, or both the database and the individual fields for something like, say, secure data like HIPAA or something like that? What do you think, guys?
I don't mean to keep jumping in first, but we literally just are doing this for a client. Their database has a lot of, well, first of all, we have to encrypt the whole database because it's on FileMaker Cloud, which requires you use encryption at rest anyway. But even if we weren't there, we would still do it because of they deal with medical information. But they also deal with a certain number of credit cards. And so while the whole database is encrypted, we also encrypt the credit card numbers that are stored there, because I've seen where the credit card information is not encrypted individually, and there are users that, if they have enough experience with FileMaker, can figure out how to export all the credit card numbers to something and sell them off. I had to go in and fix somebody's solution because they had one of their people do that. So we do. So that's when, we'll encrypt if they were holding full socials. They used to hold full social security numbers. They don't do that anymore. But we would encrypt this just to play it safe. Encrypt the social security numbers, encrypt the credit card numbers, stuff like that.
And in that system, didn't they also get hardware dongles to
Yeah.
put on the keyboards?
Yeah, I got called in for this company that had a ton of credit card numbers. That's basically, it was a call center that collected credit cards.
Like magazine subscriptions.
Yeah, subscriptions and stuff like that. And they also created a new, and this was before encryption at rest and those, but they had a FileMaker file that every time they got a new client, they would duplicate the file, make minor changes to it, and then use that for the new client. And then when they were done, they would just close it and it sat on the server, and they would create another new one. So they had hundreds of files from all their customers that were all almost identical. They all had, like 1 or 2 fields different in each one, and with all these credit card numbers. And one of the first things I did was offered to add encryption to everything, and she's like, "Oh no, we don't have a problem like that." And it wasn't 6 months later that she called because one of the employees had stolen all those. So they had to go, I went and encrypted everything, and then they had to do something to the computers to not allow anyone to use a thumb drive. So disabling USB drives on Windows machines apparently at the time was extremely difficult, but they did it. So encrypt. I'm all over that.
Oh, great comments. Thanks.
Because that's actually one thing, just because of the systems we're working in, we've not had to do. Is that something where, like, you save the, whatever's encrypted individually, you save it, as text, and then whenever somebody needs to edit that record, it like loads it into a card window or something, and then like decrypts it so they have it while that card is open, and then as soon as they hit a save, then it re-encrypts it, and then nobody can see the unencrypted version anymore. Is that how you guys do it?
So the only people that can see it, anybody can enter. This is another, there is a call center part to this company. And those employees, the CSRs, they just have to, when they're referencing it, they only have to see the last 4 digits of the credit card number to verify that with the client. Sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, well, that's an old card, so we need to type in a new one." So, and the CSRs can enter a new one, no problem. Whatever they enter stays unencrypted until one of the managers who has the encryption password puts in the encryption password, and all of the unencrypted ones are automatically encrypted right then. And then it's only the manager that can ever decrypt, and they decrypt on a one at a time basis. They don't. All the credit cards never decrypt at the same time, just because you run into the same problem. You can have a manager that puts it in once and exports them all. So the manager could get them all, but he'd have to get all 10,000 one at a time. So it's unlikely that we would have much of a problem there. But that's okay. So the manager has to, when he wants to see it, he has to enter his decryption code. I think I let it stay through his session if he enters it once. Is that it?
Cool.
Did that answer your question? I feel like my mind.
It did.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and then now, have you ever done anything where like you're encrypting the entire record, or has it usually just been, this field or that field?
I've never, I don't think I've ever had to do an entire record, just this field and that field. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know it was at DevCon. I think I heard. I don't know. I don't think they were doing a presentation. I think it was just like a side conversation, and that's where JSON can be your friend, where you store everything about the person as a JSON object, and you encrypt that, so you're only really storing one blob of text about the person. But when they go to edit it, it decrypts it into JSON, and then this goes back to either your repeating fields or just regular global fields. Put all the information in there so you can see it, and then once they hit save, then it just wraps it all back up and puts it back as encrypted JSON into the text field for that record. But obviously a lot of hoops jump through for that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that's great. Because you could have the other fields that are simply pulling the JSON unstored calculations that just pull the data if you wanted it spread out on the layout, and then you have globals for editing. Yeah, that's really good. But I have not run into it yet. But I'm glad I now have a solution for it if I do. Thank you for that.
I think that might be something else I heard from the other Todd. So we have to give him credit where credit is due.
The second Todd. Yeah. Okay.
But then we have one more thing before we start wrapping things up. I guess I have a question. It's actually something that Eric and I just ran into, because we have a couple servers that we look after for our sister company. And we found that everything just runs better if we do reboots on the servers, every couple of weeks. We'll pick like a weekend and just close all the files, do a restart, and go about our business. Well, over the last couple times, we've noticed it seemed like it was taking forever for the files to close. Well, what we finally determined is that this particular server hosts a lot of files that are managing electronic documents like PDFs and scans and things like that, that's stored externally. And we just recently added some, I guess, antivirus, or I forget what exactly it was. And we think that might be slowing the backup process down. So now the backup that used to take, X amount of time is actually taking longer, and it's happening when we're trying to do, the backup. So if we try to do these restarts, so if we let the backups complete, then everything's happy. It's just taking a really long time. And so one of the solutions that we thought of, aside from taking the extra security software off that we put on, was to move the files from, still external storage, but instead of having like the FileMaker path, select the option in FileMaker server to use where you can have like a separate path for your documents themselves that's not backed up when a FileMaker backup runs, so you can kind of manage the backups of everything that's on that particular folder or volume separately, and do it through like third-party software, whether it's VM level or whatever the case might be. But we were wondering, if we just turn that option on, does it server automatically move the documents, or is that something where we're going to want to actually spin up a new VM and actually move everything from the old machine to the new machine so that it all goes into the right folders and stuff? I was just wondering if anybody had any experience with doing that kind of move with files.
I don't think we've ever changed. So I've had documents store separately. I've put in a separate path specifically for externally stored documents, but I don't think I ever changed it from one.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's where, because there was one solution or one server I just set up for a client recently, and because I knew how big it potentially would get, I actually enabled it from the get-go, but I've never changed it midstream, so that's why I was curious. So
yeah, I actually suspect that it would do it, that it would handle the move, but I've nothing to back that up other than my suspicion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we may then just err on the side of caution and find a weekend when nobody needs into that server and just kick it off on a Friday night and just have it move everything to a new machine. So, okay, well, thank you for the insight. Anything else? I got a few closing slides. If anybody doesn't, no one else has one more thing. Don't have any announcements. We'll just get right to the survey results. So one of the questions we asked was after Beth's presentation last month on integrating FMburgh forms with a FileMaker solution. Had a few different options there. Definitely kind of a tie there, as you can see, between the love the concept, but don't have a need for it, or plan to remember when the opportunity arises. So there you go. Second question we asked was when gathering system requirements for a new project, which tools do you typically use? And not surprisingly, or certainly the majority, but almost everyone uses pen and paper still. And actually a large percentage actually use FileMaker Pro to kind of prototype, and you can kind of see where everything else falls in there. Nobody uses OmniGraffle anymore, but I guess I'm wondering if I know it's not exactly the least expensive option for drawing stuff for sure. So let's see. And then the last question was if you could have any superpower, which would it be? So you can see the, and I found it interesting that you can only pick one, but teleportation and super speed were tied as the top vote getters. So I thought it was interesting that, because we always brag about FileMaker being the rapid application development environment, that it would make sense that most FileMaker developers would relate to being able to do things quickly. So there you go there. So for our important dates, our next meeting will be June 1st. It just happens that the first Wednesday of June is also the 1st of June. We've been talking about this for a little bit. Claris Engage 2022 has moved to an online-only format, which is rather disappointing because especially with the announcement about Claris Studio, there would have been a whole lot of new stuff to learn, so that's kind of a bummer. And then, of course, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness arrives in theaters on Friday. So, and I have my ticket for next Wednesday after I get back into the Pittsburgh area. So excited about that.
Cool.
The next topic is, well, we'll tell you when you're older, which will probably be sometime in the next couple of weeks. Had a lot of great discussion tonight, so we actually went a little bit over on time, but does anybody have one last thing they need to add before we sign off? Well, very good. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to join us. Again, we'll meet first Wednesday of June, do this all over again. So thank you all, and have a great night.